Hey neighbors, Samuel here. I just wanted to talk to you real quick before the episode starts, and then I'll join you at the end. So, before we start, this is an Off the Beaten Path with LaShanda Suggs, and I will not be on this episode, but Mom and Sarah did a fantastic job. I love this episode. It was so fun to listen to, so I hope you all will enjoy it. Because of how we recorded it, I'm going to split it up into two parts. So I will meet you again at the end and we'll do some gratitudes together. And then next week, you'll hear LaShanda, Mom, and Sarah give their gratitudes. So awesome. I hope you enjoy this episode and I'll talk to you soon.
Welcome to Community Roots, a place where we gather in community to talk about mental health so we can travel the journey of life together. I'm Julie Richards.
I'm Sarah Wakefield.
And we are off the beaten path today with LaShanda Suggs. Welcome, LaShanda.
Thank you so much for having me, Julie and Sarah.
We're so glad that you are here. So wherever you want to lead us, we want to go. So we're just excited to have you with us. And we've already been, for our listeners who are just joining us, we've already had a really great debriefing. LaShanda is someone who is trained in Pia Mellody's model, which is something that I have often brought up on our episodes and teaching people about. But we would just love to hear from you in any part of your journey, your story, what you're passionate about, and have a great conversation.
That's so interesting when it's left so open. I'm like, oh my God, I'm passionate about so many things. What does that look like? You know, I think at the base of my passion is the desire for people to know they can heal. Like that is it from these experiences that we've had. And so I'm a trauma specialist or a trauma specializing therapist. And I think something that is very, very important to me to understand that the generational cycles of trauma and challenges and hardships that their families have gone through, their communities have gone through, we are empowered to kind of change course on those things. But it happens in community, and it happens when we can have an understanding of the hows and the whys of things. So much of trauma is the story we make up around why something happened, which is why 2 people, 3 people, 4 people can experience the same thing and not have the same impact. It may not have the same impact in their life because there are 4 different stories about why it happened. And so I think really being able to explore the whys we've been making up and the narratives that we've been given and have given ourselves is a lot of what healing from trauma looks like. But I'm also passionate about calling systemic oppression trauma and being able to address it as such. So it is a systemic issue for sure. But what I love very much about Resmaa Menakem, who wrote the book My Grandmother's Hands, is he identifies it as a central nervous system issue, a collective central nervous system issue, which to me is just like, yes, it's putting into words these things. And I'm like, I didn't say it that way, but yes, like this lives in our body. It's in the body of our country. It's in the body of all of us as citizens and participants and non-citizens and people who don't want to be citizens. It's just, it's coursing through the blood of this nation. And so I'm passionate about that and, you know, a lot of things. So
I'm curious about the idea and just dialogue maybe a little bit further about the idea that we can heal trauma. I think that's kind of revolutionary for people, that maybe initially trauma starts off sounding like something unfamiliar, or maybe it's too ominous or scary or deep. And that's one of my catchphrases that I often say in my teaching is we get to heal trauma. Like, I love that you can have generations of PTSD and trauma history, but we can change that trajectory and we can heal. And so as you conceptualize that, like through the lens of wanting to bring systemic change, how do we kind of wed those ideas together of we're healing trauma and we're bringing systemic change? What would that even look like?
I would like to interject just really quickly for our listeners. Can we define trauma? Because I think a lot of times this nebulous idea of trauma, it's hard to pin that on yourself or to give yourself that agency that you have experienced trauma. Would you mind just taking just a brief moment to define that?
Yes, actually, Sarah, that's where I was going to start. I was going to say, let's first define how I'm using the term so that we're all on the same page. And for me, trauma is not an event or a series of events, but it is the resulting worldviews, belief systems, and behaviors from said event or event. And so I think sometimes when people think that trauma can't be healed because they're stuck on the event or the thing that happened, and we can't go back and undo that. So since we can't time travel and make those things not happen, I think a lot of people feel like they're stuck. But when we view trauma as our body's response to adverse experiences, then we start to have maybe a little bit of hope and maybe some empowerment to say, okay, my body is still with me. So I still have the grand opportunity to change some things. And so the trauma lives in our body. It is our startle response. It's the elevated heart rate. It's how we move into a state of immobility. And it's activated through our senses. We can see something, we can smell something, we can taste something, we can hear something, we can sense it on our skin. And that triggers this experience of remembering, not with the part of our brain that says, oh, this is my birthday, and this is my phone number. That's our explicit memory, but it activates our implicit memory. So I often, when I teach and train, and even when I'm doing my therapy sessions, I talk about our mental library. It just made sense for me that every single experience we've had puts a book on the shelf in our mental library. And this isn't holding, again, the cognitive details of it, but it's holding all of the senses, the smells and the sights and the how we sensed it on our skin and the taste, and all of that is building this huge library. And every experience we come in contact with is weighed against the mental library, because the brain's top 3 priorities are to keep us alive, to keep us safe, and help us avoid pain. And so when we encounter this daily activity, there is a part of our brain specifically working to say, is this safe? How do I know this is safe? It's not just enough for it to be not safe. So sometimes people, when we're talking about safety, because I want to be clear, safety is the foundation of healing. It is the foundation of healing trauma. It is going to be the foundation of shifting oppression, safety. But it's not enough for a threat to be absent in order for someone to feel safe. So we're not talking about being safe. We're talking about feeling safe. And our brain is constantly surveilling our environment, looking for cues of safety. So I'll share with you an experience that that my husband and I had about a month ago. We were driving to near Dayton to do a recorded interview with the pastor of Southbrook Church, and it wasn't going to be at the church; it was going to be at his home. And so we were driving. My husband was driving. I was in the passenger seat, and we started to get to a place where we would see like these, like every so often on each side of the street, there would be 3 American flags kind of all put together. And then you drive some more. So it felt like it was kind of a community thing. You know, you knew you were in this community because every so many feet, you were going to drive past these 3 American flags on each side. And what was so interesting is as we started to drive through them, we both noticed our bodies doing something. There was something in our bodies that we're not feeling safe. And I want to talk about this because there is such a marriage for a lot of people in our country to the flag, to the American flag. And the mental library, it means that my experiences have gone into my mental library and other people's experiences have gone into theirs. So I encounter a lot of people who are very patriotic. They hold the flag at very high esteem, and it means a lot to them when they feel people are disrespectful of the flag. Well, when I lived on the east side of, the east side of Cincinnati, my son played football, youth football, and we would have to travel to nearing counties that are east of the county I live in for some of the games. And man, you would be amazed. This was right around 2016, and you would be amazed at how many Confederate flags we passed while we were in these eastern counties. But you know what we always noticed for so many of those Confederate flags were flying right above them? The American flag. They came as a combination. And so my body held all of that information in, right? It held all of it in. So we had to establish rules for our family. The rules were no more than 4 turns, no more than 2 cornfields, no more than 1 Confederate flag. Isn't that crazy that we still made a rule for ourselves that we could see at least 1 Confederate flag and still keep going? These neighborhoods were not safe for my Black family. They didn't feel safe. And so as I'm driving in the middle of the day up near Dayton, and I'm passing these flags, what is my body doing? My body is remembering those previous experiences that we had in those eastern counties. And its response to those flags happened well before it made it to the cognitive part of my brain. Before I could make up a story about what was happening, it was happening in my body. And so I think this is important for people to understand because the reactions and the experiences that we have, they come from our body first.
I think that's so important, LaShanda, what you're saying, because for those of us that are trying to heal trauma, which I hope everybody finds a time in their journey that's a lifelong thing we can all do and become more aware of our stories. Sometimes you hear the phrase like, what are you noticing in your body? And there's this disconnect at first, I think, because when we are very cognitive and we know story as being an event or a fact, and there's not the integration yet. There's not my body's actually trying to tell me something about feeling safe or not feeling safe, or it's trying to communicate to me that tightness, the tension, the something is not okay kind of feeling, and to be aware of that's actually connecting us further into our story. And that's a little bit hard to make sense of at first. Like it almost feels like so different than maybe talk therapy is sometimes considered, here's my story, let me tell you what happened. But there's not that connection and the integration of what's happening with body, mind, soul, spirit, all of that combined.
No, I mean, that's dead on. And I think the thing I want to make clear is this is happening inside of every single person who is alive. The difference is I was aware of what was happening. When people are not aware of what's happening, that's when our brain has to grab the most convenient narrative that it can. And so sometimes a convenient narrative is the one that's in close proximity in time. So if you have children or work with children, you've probably experienced this. Like I said, I have 3 children. And one of my kids can, quote unquote, wake up on the wrong side of the bed, right? Just kind of be grumpy all day. And then well into the afternoon, one of their siblings takes a toy of theirs and they have a full out meltdown. You go to that child, you try to help them regulate, you rock them. Shh, it's okay. It's okay. Hey, what's going on? And that child said, she took my toy. And you're like, okay, that just happened though. What about the other 6 hours of the day? You know, you're like, this is not why this is happening. It's not just because she took your toy. You recognize maybe as an adult that this was just the kind of straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, that there's more under there. But it's not like the child was lying to you. They didn't make up the story. And then you say, well, no, that's not it. What else is going on? And they're like, she took my toy. And you're like, come on. So we can get frustrated. That's not all that's going on. Tell me. The child's not lying. Their brain gave them the most convenient narrative. This is the thing that happened. Sometimes the most convenient narrative is the one that has been repeated the most. And we will kind of gravitate towards that. So, I have a story. I have a niece, and she had gone through a lot in her life, and she had recently lost a parent, and I wanted to send her to camp. And so I found a camp that she could go to. And when it got close to time to go to the camp, she did not want to go. So backstory is she struggled with enuresis, and those who aren't familiar, which is involuntary urination, often called bedwetting, though she was a teenager. And so when it came time close to get to the camp, she decided she didn't want to go. Well, I recognized that it probably had something to do with that. And as I began to talk to her and saying, hey, I'm wondering if this is the reason why. And she said, yes. And I said, I think there are things we can do. I'll contact the camp leaders. Like, we can work around this. And she was brave. She went to the camp. And so when I picked her up after the week, we were riding back, and I asked her how all the camp went. And she said it was good. And I asked her about the enuresis, and she said, I didn't have an accident the whole week, which one is telling in and of itself, because you don't control that. And that tells me how safe or unsafe she felt at home. Totally different story, though. And what I did was I asked her, though, I said, tell me, sweetie, why do you think you're struggling with wetting the bed? And she said, because I'm lazy, and it broke my heart. She didn't believe she was lazy, but that was the only narrative her family had given her. You lazy, you don't wake, just this whole thing. So she internalized that narrative. And because she had no other options of what it could be, she just repeated the one that had been given to her, even though there was a part of her that didn't believe it. That's a convenient narrative. And so I think so many of us are kind of living out our lives, having trauma responses. And sometimes we call it different things: spidey sense, intuition, discernment. Sometimes we don't call it anything, and we just know, or we'll say, I don't like her. I don't like him. No, I don't like that place over there. I don't feel comfortable. That's a convenient narrative. I don't like, or why they making that face? They don't like me. All of these are convenient narratives, when the reality is our body is responding in a way that it hopes will keep us safe, will help us survive. And when we can connect with our bodies to learn the language of our body, then we can have more full awareness. And the key at that point is then to help our brain differentiate between actual threat and perceived threat. What my husband and I were able to do in the car is realize that while my body felt threatened, we were able to kind of take some deep breaths and re-narrate that story to say, I appreciate you for trying to keep me safe. And right now, it's not a real threat. But thank you for bringing my awareness. This is what I'm saying to my body. Thank you for bringing that awareness to me, because, man, without you, I wouldn't make it. Thank you for letting me know when I might be in danger. And I think if people can lean into having that kind of relationship with their bodies, then we will stop enacting so much of our trauma out on other people and ourselves.
Samuel has often talked about, and we did, I think, even the episode that we just recorded of Community Roots, and talking about the amygdala, and that it's there to keep you safe and it's trying to protect you. So sometimes you can kind of coach and talk to your amygdala to say, I've got this one. I see you. It's okay. I hear you. I know you're worked up right now, but I'm going to take good care of you. I'm going to keep you safe. And that's a good, I think, working relationship with your body, to have that awareness of, I'm feeling really activated right now. Something is really setting me off, and I don't know what that is. And like you mentioned with, being able to say, is this a real threat? Is this a perceived threat? One thing I'm curious about is, what do we do whenever someone is so unsafe in their own body. Like they're having so much reactivity to, it could be stress, it could be depression, it could be anxiety, could be physical ailments where likely trauma is underneath all of it. But when you're trying to help someone get in touch with their body and listen to their body, and the only thing that their body is doing is giving them warning, 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 danger, 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 panic attacks, overwhelm, how do you help transition into your body even being a safe place you can listen to? Because everything feels unsafe.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. I think a couple of things that I try to do with clients. One is easing them into this process of their body. And so we may say, I might say, I want you to focus on the toe next to your baby toe. Like, just notice that toe, right? What's it doing? How's it feel? How does it engage with the world? Like, it's a very underappreciated and underacknowledged part of the foot, right? It's not even one of those that gets stubbed every now and then. Like, it doesn't even get that honor. And what led me to this is I actually broke that toe. So one, broken toes suck because there's nothing you can do about it. And I at one point I did a lot of traveling for work. And so you stay at so many different hotel rooms that they all start to blend together. I decided that I was going to take that trip to the bathroom in the dark and didn't notice something that was there. And oh, it hurt so bad.
Ouch. Yeah.
And it wasn't until that toe was broken that I began to appreciate it. And so I decided I don't want things to have to break before I begin to appreciate them. So I think easing people into this process sometimes is, let's not start with your heart that has been broken so many times.
Mm.
Let's start with, you don't even start with your shoulders that carry so much weight. Let's start with your shin. Like, let's start. If you could just, what is your shin feeling right now? If you could give it a color, shape, or size, what color would you give it? And as people start to recognize their physical bodies, transitioning into what am I feeling in my body, that's a hard question until you get used to it. And when people have been disconnected from their bodies, there's no shame in that. So I start with, how do you know when you have to go to the bathroom? Do you know when you have to go to the bathroom? Yes. Okay. All right. Fair. Hey, I'm just asking. Now that you know when you have to go to the bathroom, can you differentiate between when you have to urinate and when you have to defecate? Well, yeah. Okay. If you gave each of those a color, shape, and size, what would they be? Would they be different from each other? I start with the parts that they already know. How do you know when you're hungry? Right? Yes, you're hungry. You're saying that, but how do you know? What part of your body is telling you that? And what does it feel like? I think easing people in where they are is important. And so that's kind of those abstract things. Another thing that I like to do is I like to tell people about my table. So I want you to imagine the most beautiful, biggest kitchen of your dreams. I know mine. Exactly what it looks like. It is not the kitchen I have right now, but let me tell you, I love this kitchen. And this huge island with a table off to the side. So it's like this huge peninsula. And there are chairs sat around this huge peninsula. And each one of those chairs is for every part of me. And they're empty chairs, some empty chairs, because there are parts of me that I know I haven't fully made contact with. And so what I've had to understand is that every part of me gets a seat at the table. How I came to this conclusion is because I am a people-pleasing shapeshifter in recovery. And so I learned how to be whoever I needed to be whenever I needed to be it. And part of that people pleasing was Shanda was happy. Oh my goodness, you're so happy. She smiles so much. Nothing gets her down. Like, just happy. I smile. So when things like fear, resentment, rejection, rage, when those things would start to like pop up, I would squash them down as far as I could, push them back as far as I could, because that did not fit the narrative that I was trying to bring across. None of this was conscious, by the way. I didn't sit up and dream this. This is just how I engage with the world based on my own developmental and relational trauma. And so what I started to notice, though, is those things I was trying to suppress felt like they were getting stronger and louder. And it's like the kid in the grocery store that's having the full out tantrum. And everyone is looking like, oh my God, they're either judging the kid or the parent or both. When the thing is, that child, very few children go to straight out tantrum first. There were signs, signals, and warnings before the tantrum that gave indication that they weren't regulated or they were losing regulation. So what I realized is my emotions that I considered bad or negative were tantruming, and they would get really big and I couldn't control them. And I would try to make them stop, and I wasn't winning and it wasn't effective. So then I realized, what are you trying to say? Fine, I'll listen. And once I started to listen to what those parts of me were trying to communicate, then the tantrums became fewer, farther in between. Once those parts of me truly believed that I would listen to what they had to say, they could talk to me and they could communicate, because every part of me was trying to accomplish the same thing. We got to stay alive. We got to stay safe. We want to avoid pain. And even if that led me to more pain, the goal was to help me avoid it. And so I learned to assemble my table to say, all right, everybody come to the table. But the rule is you only get to talk when you're at the table. Why? Because you're surrounded by every other part of me that can give you support. And so I no longer view emotions or certain parts of myself as good or bad. They just are. And they're trying to communicate, and they're trying to point me in the direction of something they want me to know. And when I take those value judgments away, right, wrong, good, bad, and instead they just are, that's the practice of mindfulness. How do I observe my experience in non-judgment? Then I realize, okay, this is what you're trying to communicate to me. And it doesn't mean that I have to make decisions based on rage or based on fear or based on resentment, but it's there for a reason. And when I start to listen to the lessons they're trying to make me aware of, then I have this kind of holistic experience. That means I don't have to only pretend that I'm full of joy and love and happiness. No, sometimes life sucks and that's okay. And I don't have to fix it or solve it. I just need to know that it's okay, that that is the experience. And I feel like if we can help people establish their own version of a table where they can allow every part of themselves to be real, and they can start walking this journey of authenticity, then the notion of healing trauma doesn't seem so far-fetched or so foreign, because they're empowered to just kind of have those experiences and know that their body is collaborating to keep them alive, even if it's painful.
When you are trying to take your body from this fight, flight, slash, like heightened state of arousal, I think is how Julie has mentioned it before, of, outside this window of tolerance, to the table. How would you recommend or encourage people to create that table? So are you, to start that discussion, are you saying, find a place to meditate, um, carve out an afternoon? What would be the first step to getting your table together?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. Um, I, I do think I'm gonna take the cop out answer. It's different for each person. No, but it's true. And so some suggestions that I have for that is we begin with this idea of awareness. So many times I encounter people who know they're feeling something and they don't know what that thing is. So I use a feelings wheel for people. And I also have a list of words that describe sensations, bodily sensations. And so if you are one of those people or know people who, when you say, how are you doing today? Good. And then I would say, well, good's not a feeling. How are you feeling? Good. What does that mean? So sometimes people just have a lack of awareness of the vocabulary to express what their experience is. They don't have words like shiver, hollow, weighty, prickly. They don't have those words to describe what they're feeling. And then they don't have words like disappointed, rejected, embarrassed. They don't have those words to describe this experience. So I think a good step is starting to build vocabulary and an awareness that there are things beyond happy, sad, mad. There are things besides cold, hungry. How do you know you're hungry? What is it in your belly? What feeling is that? And so I think if we can increase people's awareness of vocabulary, they just feel less stuck with describing their experience or recognizing their experience. And then as they develop that vocabulary, helping them lean into the mindful practice of it just is. If it's embarrassment that I feel, but then I think, so how do I make it go away? Then that becomes more difficult. How do we just lean into that felt embarrassing? How do I know it was embarrassing? Because I felt myself cave inward. I felt myself getting smaller. Okay, let's breathe into that. Let's just exhale. Okay. When we set up this practice of I can feel a thing, I can experience a thing and not die, the brain is like, oh, okay. Hey, we didn't die. That's good. Because it's always looking for, are we going to die? And so when we can name that thing and we can then say, this is what I experienced, and okay. Okay is one of my favorite words. Doesn't have to be good. It's just okay. It is what it is. And I think a lot of people, because I definitely felt this way, if I didn't think it and I didn't say it, then it would go away. No, I'm not angry because I'm trying not to think angry thoughts, and I'm not saying I'm angry out loud. So I can't be angry. When I realized that a name didn't make that thing go away in my body, it's like, well, let's just name it then, if it's going to be here anyway. So I think those are some beginning steps that are helpful. I also recommend visualization is so important because our brain does not know the difference between memory, reality, and imagination. It is like all the same thing to the brain. How do we know this? If you've ever had a dream when you've been being chased or falling and you wake up and you're short of breath, you might even be sweating. Were you running or falling? No, you were dreaming. But because your brain thought that you were doing those things, it mobilized the body to do whatever it would do if you were doing those things. And so I think this is super, super important for people who have a tendency to ruminate on negative things. As you're ruminating on negative things, your brain is like, uh-oh, this is happening again. And so it mobilizes your body to do whatever it needs to do to keep you safe in that environment. And that is the difference between traumatic memory and just the other memories that go to the memory part of our brain. The memories that go to the memory part of our brain are kind of, oh yeah, this is what I did on my 21st birthday. If it was the best day of your life on that day, 10 years later, you'd be like, yeah, it was kind of fun. And if it was the worst day of your life, 10 years later, you're like, yeah, it wasn't that great. It loses its edges, it loses intensity, and it becomes more of this cognitive thing of this is what I did. But traumatic experiences don't go to the memory part of your brain. They live on your central nervous system. So when it gets activated, it's like you're in it in that moment. So part of our recovery is being safe in our bodies right now by allowing our brain to understand, yes, it feels like this is what's happening again, but through taking deep breaths, through grounding myself in my five senses to look around the room and see what I see and what do I smell and what do I hear, and eating a peppermint so I can taste something, or whatever it is to ground you on your senses, you begin to help your brain know, wait, I'm actually right here in the present. Oh, okay. So visualizations are important. So when I talk about my table, I see my table. I know exactly what it looks like. If I could draw better, I'd draw you my table. So sometimes I suggest for people to visualize that. If there is a part of you that you're working with, give it a color. If it had a shape, if it had a size, is there an image? So that as we're kind of working through these things, whether it's through self-talk, or whether it's through whatever form, as we visualize it, it helps. Because Julie talks about Pia's model all the time, my inner children, the ones specifically that I've done work around, I have a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 9-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 17-year-old. And I know what they're wearing. They wear this, they're like a cartoon. So they wear the same thing all the time. They don't change clothes, but I know what they're wearing. And so when I'm talking to that little child in me who gets activated because she feels alone, or she feels like she's done something wrong, or that she can't control what happens to her body, I can see them when I'm thinking these thoughts of, you're okay, you're safe, you haven't done anything wrong. I can visualize them. And why that's important is because my body starts to respond as if some loving adult has come to that child and wrapped their arms around her and said she's going to be okay. And I that's the power of our mind. And I think that we can use that to heal.
And that's so transformational for people that might feel, we have that negativity bias, that we can get caught in those ruts of just everything hurts, everything feels bad, I can't find anything that is okay. And how do you transition, but little bit by little bit, to have that awareness of things that are okay, or that I can see something that's a little bit more neutral. It doesn't have to all be good, bad, and strong, extreme emotion. I can just find something that's neutral and start with that, and kind of work the way out of that negativity, rumination, that pit that people can kind of feel stuck.
Okay, everyone. As we near the end of the episode, we like to end with gratitudes or affirmations. I really love this affirmation inclusion that we've added, this addition that Shainisha offered to add, and I think it's great. So I'm going to do an affirmation today. I am strong and in control of my life and emotions. Sometimes it feels like life gets away, or that I get angry or upset, or things just become overwhelming. But I like to remind myself I am in control. I am the architect of my own existence. I think I read that somewhere. I hope you all. So that is my affirmation this week. I hope you all have a fantastic week. We will see you again next Tuesday. We will have the second part of this episode where LaShanda and Mom and Sarah dive a little bit deeper into trauma, systemic trauma, and stuff like that. So hope you have a great week, and I will talk to you soon.